Part 44. Rebirth of Fantasy, Obtain the Sect System. Author, Red General. Chapter 431. However, they were still a little surprised by Qin Xian's appearance, but they were more curious. I wonder how Qin Xian can resist this thunder. In front of this thunder, they all felt a little helpless. The giant thing in the sky looked at Qin Xian's figure, raised his eyebrows, then smiled and said coldly, "It seems that the hostage with the Dao body is your apprentice, right? It's really a good relationship. It's a pity that even if you are extremely talented, how can you resist my power? In front of me, you are just an ant who can only resist, hum." The giant thing further increased the power of the divine thunder. The entire sky was illuminated by lightning. Qin Xian stepped high into the sky and raised his eyes to look at the descending divine thunder. There was no trace of fear in his eyes, but a trace of curiosity. Curious whether this power can destroy him. I saw Qin Xian condensing the great Dao with his bare hands, time rolling down like a river, and this area was instantly controlled by him. In an instant, the speed of Shenlei began to slow down, as if it was frozen at that moment. When the giant creature in the void saw this, its eyes trembled. Time. He fell into silence. The strong men also fell into silence. But even more so, it was incredible and horrifying. They never expected that this person was not only extremely talented, but could also control the use of the great Dao of time. Not good news for them. Now they are no longer curious about whether Qin Xian can resist it, but more hope that Qin Xian will die under this giant thunder. Otherwise, I am afraid that my power will be shattered soon. There are not many people practicing the law of time in the 10 domains, only about 7 or 8 people. Because time is so difficult to cultivate, trying to fully use the law of time is like reaching the sky and wishful thinking. It is impossible to reach the point where Qin Xian can directly control time with a single thought. In addition, what makes them more confused is why such a genius as Qin Xian never appeared in the world. Do you just want to hide behind the scenes? On the other side, there is the palace of heavenly Dao, a vast immortal palace. An old man wearing a star robe with a weathered face looked at Qin Xian's figure with his hands behind his back. His eyebrows were full of praise for Qin Xian. There is still a bit of shock, but more of a shock to the owner of Tiandao body. Because their Tiandao palace was founded by a genius with a Tiandao body. Logically speaking, the current palace master of each generation of heavenly Dao body must possess heavenly Dao body before he can serve. But time has passed, and the years have passed. Now let alone the heavenly Dao body, no one in the heavenly Dao palace can even be born with a physique that can master the initial laws. What a tragedy! As the master of the Tiandao palace, he had long seen who was responsible for that extremely powerful divine thunder. But he was powerless and could only watch helplessly. The territory lord is not something that a mere ancestor can resist. The way of heaven has long been eliminated by them, and everything in the world is under the control of these 10 people. No matter how strong you are, the domain lord only needs to move his fingers slightly to bring down a shocking disaster and destroy you. At this moment, there was a commotion high in the sky. Qin Xian exploded with all his strength, condensing one terrifying law after another to launch a fierce offensive against the giant thunder. Boom! 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 One collision after another resounded throughout the world, and terrifying air waves swept across hundreds of millions of miles in radius. This thunderous sound exploded in the ears of everyone, leaving them dumbfounded and looking horrified. The reason why Qin Xian did this was that he wanted to neutralize the power of the divine thunder with one move. After all, Qin Xian couldn't resist it directly with his bare hands. This is no different than seeking death. The process of weakening power is extremely long. Qin Xian not only has to control the use of time, but also the use of other great Dao. This is an extremely time-consuming process. But you know, this is just a small trick of a giant. With one small move, Qin Xian unleashed all his strength, so how could Qin Xian resist it? Somewhere in the void? The giant was a little surprised that Qin Xian had the ability to control time, but it was not enough to make him feel scared. After all, as the territory lord who controls everything in the world, who is he afraid of? He could step on the laws of heaven, let alone Qin Xian. Having said this, the giant sneered. And, if I move even a little bit, you have already used all your strength. If I use other moves, what should you do? The giant's eyes were full of teasing and ridicule towards Qin Xian. The next moment, there was a sudden noise above where the divine thunder had landed. The robbery clouds began to slowly condense due to this noise. In an instant, I saw a huge thunder that was not inferior to the one in front of me emerging from the calamity cloud. A crackling sound resounded throughout the world, and all the strong men looked at it, and all of them began to be afraid, and their bodies could not stop trembling. There was a look of panic in his eyes. With a rumble, a giant thunder emerged from the calamity cloud, exploding with incomparable power and began to strike towards Qin Xian. Originally, he just wanted to eradicate the people who possessed Tian Dao body, but he didn't expect Qin Xian to make the giant thing slightly interesting. Qin Xian will die today. Because Zhu Wu saw an unstoppable talent in him, which was far beyond the reach of Tian Dao body. When the powerful men saw this scene, their eyes trembled, and there was a trace of despair in their eyes. How to resist this? Even Zilong didn't think highly of Qin Xian this time. Sighed slightly. Disaster. Lin Tian, who was in Tianqian Hall, had already woken up. When he saw the people in the hall, he couldn't help but be confused, and then asked. Master, oh no, where has he gone, Sect Master? Wasn't he here just now? After hearing this, several people turned to look at him, sighed, and replied. The Sect Master went to fight against the calamity for you, and now. Hearing this, Lin Tian's heart tightened and he hurriedly looked up to the sky. It was discovered that Qin Xian was resisting the two giant thunders with all his strength. Even though the gap between the two was huge, he never gave up at all. Seeing this situation, Lin Tian clenched his fists, feeling a little guilty in his heart, and wanted to help, but before he could move, he was pulled back by Xue Xue on the side. Xue Xue looked at him and shook his head. Don't go and die. We can only watch this battle. Even if you break through the immortal emperor, it will have no effect. Didn't you see that the Sect Master exerted all his strength to reach the ancestor, and he could only barely fight against the calamity? If you go, you will have no effect at all except causing trouble for the sect leader. This. Lin Tian lowered his head, clenched his fists, and pursed his lips tightly. Seeing this, everyone shook their heads helplessly, and it was hard to say anything to comfort him. After all, some words were hard to say. Seeing that Qin Xian was still stubbornly resisting, the giant creature in the void shook its head disdainfully. Rebirth of Fantasy, Obtain the Sect System. Author, Red General. Chapter 432. He had only exerted 10% of his strength and Qin Xian was going all out, which made him feel a little bored. The giant creature no longer had any interest in teasing Qin Xian. With a sharp look in his eyes, the two giant thunders stopped operating, and a psychological great Dao that made people unable to resist directly controlled Qin Xian. In the blink of an eye, chains appeared out of thin air one after another, wrapping around his limbs and binding Qin Xian tightly, unable to move. And the huge thunder that was not running rushed into his body instantly. In an instant, there was a collision in Qin Xian's body, and lightning flowed into his limbs, bones, and internal organs. This powerful force made Qin Xian frown, but his expression was not very moved. Because the power of thunder and lightning is still too weak for him. All the strong men looked at the scene and were speechless. They didn't know what to say, so they could only watch closely. The demon lord who was hiding behind the scenes also let go of his consciousness, raised his eyebrows at this scene, and then chuckled. He, it is worthy of the power of the territory lord. It really makes people feel desperate. With my current strength, I am still half a point away from the territory lord. But what surprised me was how strong this man was and how he could withstand such thunder and lightning. Having said this, the demon lord showed a trace of regret on his face. What a pity for such a talented person. Zhu frowned when he saw that Qin Xian was still insisting. It's really unexpected that an ant can resist to such a fierce level. But it doesn't matter. He said that no matter how strong he is, he can't turn his hand out. In the 10 realms, he is heaven. The giant laughed ferociously and increased the power of thunder and lightning again. The power released this time has reached about 30% of the giant's own strength. Qin Xian felt the intensification of thunder and lightning, his face finally moved a little, and he gasped heavily. A trace of sweat appeared from his forehead. This situation only lasted for half a stick of incense. Gradually, the thunder and lightning made him feel no pain at all, and Qin Xian could be said to be numb. Seeing this scene, the giant creature's expression remained unchanged, and with the thought, it once again released a flame that burned everything. The flames illuminated the entire sky like a long river, and everyone was blinded by the flames. Qin Xian only frowned, but it was enough to see the fatigue on his face. I can't resist it. This time, Qin Xian really couldn't resist, but Qin Xian's ability to compete with the domain lord in the ancestral realm was enough to make people praise him. Even if he dies, Qin Xian's name will spread in the world and be remembered by the world. But is he really going to die? Boom! Suddenly, the originally fierce flame seemed to be controlled by something, and it began to stay in mid-air, motionless. The giant creature in the void frowned, and before he could speak, there was a roar, and the flames turned into sparks and dissipated into the sky. At this moment, Qin Xian's eyes were close to hazy, and he could not see anything clearly. He could only feel a figure appearing next to him. But he could no longer hear the words in his ears clearly. His body was severely injured, and although it looked intact on the outside, it was already riddled with holes inside. The power of thunder and lightning has destroyed Qin Xian's foundation and internal organs, and his limbs and bones are almost damaged. It is extremely difficult to recover from such a serious injury. The giant's face was not touched at all when he saw his flames destroyed. However, when he saw the figure next to Qin Xian, his eyes suddenly trembled and he exclaimed. The giant clenched his fists, gritted his teeth, and had an angry look on his face, but there was nothing he could do, even though he had a way to find the figure. But in the end, he didn't say anything, and his consciousness dissipated in this world, followed closely by other strong men. The figure turned a blind eye to this, and took Qin Xian to a place where the laws of immortal energy were strong and began to recover his injuries. It caused severe pain in their eardrums. All the laws of the world survive and are born here. When did I say I wanted to fight you? I said back then that I am the real way of heaven. Even if you kill me, it will be useless, because one day, I will be resurrected. You are arrogant and have not fully recovered. How can you fight with me? Are you just relying on him? And the figure had already disappeared into this world with Qin Xian, leaving only the giant creature staring at it. It's just that the figure's strength is not enough, and besides, he is just a remnant soul and does not have much ability. On the other side, the figure led Qin Xian to a place full of Dao realm, where the stars were as bright as the galaxy. But doing so would be tantamount to injuring the enemy 1,000 times and damaging oneself 800. Then everything done by the other 9 domain masters would be in vain. Zhu will not do things that are not worth the gain, nor will his emotions be affected by anger. The giant breathed out heavily and looked at Lin Tian, who was in Tianqian Palace. He was silent for a while, and finally dissipated into the world with overwhelming pressure. Heavenly Way. As expected, you still have secret skills left to survive in the world, and it still resides in a person's body. The force of profound heaven sect has also been quietly arranged by the world to be a transcendent level force, which is enough to be on par with the 7 kills Hall human temple. The figure didn't pay attention to the giant thing's words and replied softly. Haha, we underestimated you after all. The sound spread across heaven and earth, resounding in everyone's ears. They also labeled profound heaven sect as a force that should not be messed with. After all, no one knew whether Tiandeo had a backup plan. The demon lord of demon race looked at the scene of the confrontation between the two and remained silent, seeming to be thinking about something. But I was more shocked and surprised. My heart is like a turbulent wave, and I can't calm down for a long time. The giant pointed his finger at the unconscious Qin Xian. Furthermore, the other 9 domain lords would not agree to this matter. The giant creature roared. Hee hee. However, there were still some curious people who stayed to watch this scene, with a trace of doubt and confusion in their eyes. When Xiao Long, who originally had no hope for Qin Xian, saw this scene, his pupils were shocked. Afterwards, the only remaining consciousness of everyone slowly dissipated. But the face of the figure next to Qin Xian remained calm. He listened quietly to the giant creature's words, and a smile appeared on the blurry figure. Because they didn't expect that Tiandeo, who was originally dead, was still alive in the world. The next moment, this area turned into nothingness, seeming to have fallen into a kind of time stasis. The giant frowned, as if he had thought of something, but by the time he realized it, it was already too late. The giant creature let out a cold laugh and said disdainfully. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of Fantasy, Obtain the Sect System. Author, Red General. Chapter 433. We can only make a rough recovery of Qin Xian's injuries, and the rest depends on Qin Xian himself. However, even if Qin Xian's injuries are restored, his strength will be greatly reduced. After all, it is considered good to be able to retain the strength of Immortal Sovereign if his foundation is damaged. It is simply impossible to retain peak strength. Unless the figure is restored to its full body, it's almost the same. The human figure is the system and the original way of heaven. Originally, he was only one step away from restoring his body and reaching a complete body. Unfortunately, the human figure did not expect that Tiandeo body would attract the attention of the Territory Lord, and also lead the Territory Lord to take action. If this hadn't happened, he would have been able to transform into a complete body soon, and he would have been able to take back what he wanted. But when Qin Xian was dying, he couldn't just sit back and watch, because he and Qin Xian were one and the same. If Qin Xian died, he would also die. In desperation, the figure could only choose to stop the transformation, use his remaining strength to rescue Qin Xian and bring him here. Time is like water, and the years are full of vicissitudes. In the blink of an eye, 7 years have passed. Qin Xian woke up with a stabbing pain in his mind. He looked at the endless galaxy around him, with a hint of doubt in his eyes. Where is this? How did I get here? Qin Xian touched his slightly painful head and murmured. But the next moment, a figure appeared in front of Qin Xian, and this action made him instantly alert. Looking at him with a frown. But the figure only showed a smile to Qin Xian and asked. How are your injuries? Hearing this, Qin Xian was stunned for a moment and then reacted immediately. Understanding that he should have been rescued by him, but was able to escape in the hands of the Domain Lord, Qin Xian couldn't help but doubt the identity of the person in front of him. The figure seemed to have guessed what he was thinking and said. Don't worry, I don't have any hostility towards you, otherwise you wouldn't be where you are now. Qin Xian came to his senses, nodded to him, and thanked him. Thank you very much. I wonder what your senior's name is. The figure shook his head and replied. I don't have a name. If I do, you can call me the system? What? Hearing this, Qin Xian's pupils trembled and he was stunned. The system was one of his secrets and he had never told anyone. Qin Xian looked at him with shock and said hesitantly. You are the system? This is impossible. The system still has autonomous consciousness. The figure seemed to have guessed Qin Xian's expression a long time ago. He still nodded with a smile on his face and said, I am the system. I was injured and had no choice but to come to your side, and turned into a system and resided in your body. Besides, you and I are destined to be together. Destined. Qin Xian raised his eyebrows when he heard this. In that case, everything was arranged before he was reborn from the original world. But why is it so strange when the word destiny is spoken in Tiandao's mouth? I couldn't help but ask. Isn't it right? As the Dao of heaven, why do you have any destiny? Isn't everything in the world under your control? Upon hearing Qin Xian's inquiry, the system nodded but shook its head and replied. Let me tell you this, everything in the world is indeed under my control, but it is only limited to the places I control. I can't interfere in other places. Take Profound Heaven Continent as an example. Although Profound Heaven Continent's heavenly law is weak and I can devour it at will, it is also the law that exists in the world. If you swallow it, it won't do anything to me. After all, this is about something unspeakable. I believe you have heard of the word universe, right? Hearing this, Qin Xian nodded, his eyes lit up as if he had guessed something, and asked suspiciously. If that's the case, is there anyone in this world who is more powerful than you? The system nodded with a smile. Indeed, it does, but it will not interfere with everything in the world at will, because the myriad worlds are only within its thoughts. Moreover, it doesn't have any spiritual consciousness. You call it strong, but it's terrifyingly strong. You call it weak, but it doesn't care about anything. You can call it whatever you want. It's like a clock. No matter how it spins, it will still be the same. There will be no change unless someone controls it. But as an existence of that level, who can control it? Qin Xian fell into silence after hearing System 1's coherent words. That certainly seems to be the case. The same was true for the world he was in before. It was just like a planet without spiritual consciousness. It only moved and the rest did not move. It followed all the laws of the world. Then Qin Xian looked at his body again. At this moment, he was no longer as powerful as the immortal emperor. However, I can still master the use of Great Dao. This made him a little confused. He is no longer the immortal emperor, so why can he still control the power of the Great Dao so much? Seeing Qin Xian's confused expression, the system explained. I made new adjustments to your body. Although I can't retain the previous immortal emperor realm, I gave you a new body refining system. New body refining system? Qin Xian looked startled and asked hurriedly. What system is it? The system replied with a smile, it is no different from the one created by those 10 people, except that the realm of the ancestor has been replaced by Dao ancestor. Dao ancestor? Hearing the name of this realm, Qin Xian raised his chin. But the system is not finished yet. Dao ancestor means the great Dao that can control everything in the world. When I was in charge, the highest state was Dao ancestor. Dao ancestor, as the name suggests, is the master of heaven and earth. The master of the great Dao is equal to the way of heaven. But he cannot surpass the way of heaven. These 10 domain lords became Dao ancestor under my body refining system. However, they did not use Dao ancestor as the body refining system, but replaced them with the ancestors. Because they don't want people of Dao ancestors level to appear again, otherwise, their good days will come to an end. Qin Xian frowned when he heard the system's words. In that case, why did you lose to them again? Didn't you say that Dao ancestor can't surpass Tiandao? These words seemed to poke a sore point in the system. He sighed and replied. This is all thanks to the laws of myriad worlds. I just told you that everything in the world is constantly changing. Some things will happen that are supposed to happen. This is the case for these 10 people. Their identities are very strange. They are the rumored 10 saints. They are the pinnacle of saint realm when they are born, and they can also directly master the use of the great Dao with the strength of saint realm. Rebirth of Fantasy, obtain the Sect system. Author, Red General. Chapter 434. Their talents can be praised as being the best among the ancients. These 10 people have reached Dao Ancestor in just a few decades. Although Dao Ancestor cannot surpass the way of heaven, but together they will make me feel threatened. What's more, these 10 people are not ordinary. Together, I am no match for them. Because of this, I couldn't control them. I was eventually defeated by them, and they took my place. You can also call them sons of fortune, but they are just luck that is not under my control. Furthermore, they are born following all the rules in the world, and I will eventually be replaced. Qin Xian glanced at him, nodded, lowered his head and fell into deep thought. What Qin Xian didn't know was that after saying these words, a mysterious smile appeared on the corner of the system's mouth. He didn't know all this, and now Qin Xian was thinking about what to do next. After all, his profound heaven sect had been discovered by all the forces, and maybe a war had already broken out at this time. 7 years have passed, and no one knows what will happen. Thinking of this, Qin Xian looked at the system, but did not ask any questions. He was silent for half an hour before asking. By the way, can your upgrade still be successful? The system shook its head. I don't know, because I was forcibly separated from the upgrade and came directly. So it consumes some energy. I don't know whether the upgrade will be unsuccessful, but the chance of success is only about 50%. Whether it works or not depends on luck. After hearing the system's answer, Qin Xian nodded, turned around and looked into the distance, his eyes gradually deepened, and he said. Then what do you think I should do now? Should I concentrate on practicing here, or should I return to the sect? Upon hearing this, the system did not reply, but instead a ball of light appeared in its hand. Then it penetrated into Qin Xian's body without hesitation. In an instant, an erratic power appeared in Qin Xian's body, and this power was changing his body. The next moment, the galaxy was shaking, and the power of the great Dao appeared around him one after another. All the power of Law was wandering near Qin Xian at this moment, seeming to have recognized him as its master. Seeing this scene, Qin Xian frowned and closed his eyes tightly. There was no joy on his face, but a solemn look on his face. This situation lasted for nearly half an hour. After a long time, Qin Xian let out a breath and opened his eyes, with a strong pressure in his eyes. Although his strength has not been fully restored, Qin Xian feels another type of body refining system. That is the most primitive system, and the highest state of this system is Dao Ancestor. He, Qin Xian, no longer needs to practice according to the system given by the 10 major domain lords, but can practice according to the body refining system given to him by the system. Because only in this way can he deal with the 10 major domain lords and surpass them. Otherwise, he will be restricted to the top 10 domain lords all his life, and will be unable to break through to the next step. In fact, the system had no choice but to hand over the body refining system to Qin Xian. After all, something happened. This thing can only be handed over to Qin Xian like this. Otherwise, within a few decades, he would never hand it over easily, because this thing is quite precious to him. Then he saw that the system began to carefully observe Qin Xian's body. After a few breaths, he couldn't help but nodded with satisfaction and chuckled. Very good. You only need to practice for a few days and you will be able to fully control the system I taught you. Qin Xian smiled and nodded. Before he could speak, he found that the system's body seemed to become illusory, and it seemed that it would dissipate the next moment. As soon as the words fell, the system disappeared into this void. And he also felt a sense of familiarity from it. I saw a man with a tall and straight figure, wearing long black clothes and deep eyes appearing there. You, what's going on with you? Did something happen to your body? Why did you turn into a cloud? And Qin Xian's body also appeared in a pavilion in Profound Heaven Sect. Nowadays, there are strong men from the law enforcement palace patrolling the sect master peak everywhere, and the strength of each of them has reached the level of the immortal king. Then Qin Xian began to explore the aura of the higher UPS of Profound Heaven Sect. Qin Xian raised his eyebrows, looked around, found a thin disciple and asked. Upon hearing Qin Xian's question, the system was not surprised by the changes in his body. He sighed and replied to Qin Xian. And came to a sect master peak with a vast terrain and endless views. In addition, Qin Xian also felt that there would be powerful spiritual consciousness scanning this area somewhere in the void. The man smiled at Qin Xian, and if he looked carefully, he could see a hint of pride in his expression. Upon hearing this, Qin Xian raised his eyes and looked up. High in the sky, a delicate-looking woman wearing a gorgeous white dress and riding white clouds arrived here. Including the original Immortal Emperor, the current Profound Heaven Sect has a total of 12 powerful Immortal Emperors. There are just a few who seem to be strong players in Dragon Race. This is the statue of Qin Xian, the previous generation leader of Profound Heaven Section. I believe you have never seen it, right? The woman's eyes were like water, and her pretty face was filled with coldness. It wasn't until she saw the statue that her face showed any emotion. Soon he took him around the inner gate and explained the uses of this place and so on. Profound Heaven Sect actually produced 8 more powerful immortal emperors out of thin air. And it may take about 10 years to wake up, so in these 10 years, I won't be able to answer some of the questions you asked. Take care. This senior brother is a disciple who has just entered the inner sect recently. Since he is not familiar with the area here, can I ask for advice? Looking at the extremely familiar but somewhat changed scene that came into his eyes, Qin Xian's face revealed a complicated expression. Until he came to a wide altar, the man paused for a while. This made Qin Xian show a hint of surprise, and with a movement of his body, he transformed into an ordinary inner disciple of Profound Heaven Sect. If Qin Xian guessed correctly, this kind of spiritual consciousness should be around the ancient sage. This is a lack of energy. Soon I will dissipate and fall into deep sleep again. Hearing this, the thin man nodded and was happy to help Qin Xian. I didn't know this when I checked, and I was shocked when I checked. Even the strength of the team leader has reached the level of immortal sovereign. Suddenly, Qin Xian's eyes lit up. He pointed at the statue at the top of the altar. Finally, he sighed far away. Although it was a statue, Qin Xian could still feel the terrifying aura emanating from this ordinary statue. 7 years have passed, and I don't know what the Profound Heaven Sect is like now. Rebirth of Fantasy, Obtain the Sect System. Author, Red General. Chapter 435. But it wasn't over yet. In the blink of an eye, a man in red clothes came to her side and took the woman's thin hand. Fingers clasped together, eyes fixed on the statue. Now the two of them are like a pair of happy mandarin ducks. Seeing this scene, Qin Xian already recognized who the two of them were. One of the women is Qin Xian's eldest disciple Shang Guan Xianfeng, and the other man is Xiaoran's disciple Huo Yi. But what he didn't expect was that the two people actually came together, and judging from their actions, it seemed that they had already had a long-term relationship. At this moment, the man next to Qin Xian no longer had a smile on his face, but instead was filled with enthusiasm and admiration. The man hurriedly grabbed Qin Xian's hand and exclaimed, "Did you see that, junior brother? These two people are Shang Guan Xianfeng, the master of Profound Heaven Sect 100 Flowers Peak, and Huo Yi, the master of Huoyun Peak. I didn't expect that I would be able to witness the arrival of the two of them today. Ha ha ha. The man made a sound of great joy. The sound was extremely loud and spread around, attracting the attention of many disciples. The other disciples were a little confused at first and didn't understand why the man was laughing. Until they saw the two people in the air at the statue, they couldn't help but froze, with a hint of shock on their faces. Then everyone hurriedly leaned over and cupped their hands and said, "I'll wait to meet the two peak masters." Seeing this, the man quickly leaned over and raised his hands, but when he saw Qin Xian on the side, he didn't actually raise his hands, which made him startled. But he didn't think too much, thinking that he just didn't understand the rules, so he hurriedly pulled him down and said, "Don't be stunned, hurry up and salute. This is an opportunity that comes only once and for all." Hearing this, Qin Xian smiled, but he didn't care, but he still pretended to lean down. When Shangguan Xianfeng and Huo Yi saw this situation, they also raised their eyes and looked over. They glanced at everyone one by one and nodded with a smile. Then he looked back at the huge statue in front of him. There was some strong emotion in his eyes. But it's not the kind of emotion between lovers, but the kind between master and disciple, or father and son. There is self-blame, helplessness, and longing. But no one wants Qin Xian to come back. The two of them always believed that Qin Xian was not dead, they only thought that he was hiding somewhere to recover from his injuries. Other senior officials thought the same way, and they always retained a glimmer of hope for Qin Xian in their hearts. The two of them stayed in front of the huge statue for a long time, and it took half an hour before they left in the clouds. Qin Xian saw all this, and after thinking for a moment, he still had no idea of acknowledging the two of them. It's not that he wants to pretend to be a pig and eat the tiger, but Qin Xian wants to see what changes have been made in the sect in the past 7 years. See if there are some people with evil intentions causing trouble in the sect. If Qin Xian had directly assumed power from the beginning, these people might have been hidden. This is not what he wants to see. Then Qin Xian wandered around with the man again for a while, and soon they broke up at a fork in the road. After all, he knew almost everything about the sect and some newly built places, so it was time to get down to business. Finally, Qin Xian came to an extremely dark mountain peak, where black mist was emitting everywhere and poisonous insects were everywhere. Seeing this, Qin Xian's expression remained unchanged, as if he knew where he was, and he still walked towards the mountain peak. After a while, Qin Xian came to a dilapidated attic. There was no light in the attic, only darkness appeared, and there was a strong smell of blood spreading around. Qin Xian turned a blind eye to this and walked into the attic. At this moment, the shabby attic suddenly took on a new look and turned into a magnificent hall. The man in black robe opposite him was stunned for a moment. He finally came to his senses and issued a secret order. But the most eye-catching thing is the word soul on his chest. What about the Shadow Palace? Reporting back to Senior, the Shadow Palace is currently confronting a mysterious man and the human race temple in the Holy State. In the past 7 years, Lin Tian's life has been worse than death. Because he understood that everything was caused by himself. Hearing this, the man in black robe frowned, but suddenly felt something was wrong. As long as there is no catastrophe of annihilation of the sect, the strong men of the second hall will rarely appear in front of the disciples of the sect. He felt that the person in front of him was very familiar, as if he had seen him somewhere, but he couldn't remember it despite racking his brains. This is why this mountain is so dark. The master who harmed him does not know whether he is alive or dead. It is precisely because of this that the breath of Tiandao body will be revealed, otherwise the giant will not notice. Thinking of this, Qin Xian couldn't help but nodded with satisfaction, looked at the man in black robe and continued to ask. Because of Qin Xian's disappearance, the Soul Palace, Shadow Palace and Profound Heaven Sect now have very few contacts. It's perfect. At least in the short term, Profound Heaven Sect won't have any problems being besieged by top forces. Hearing this, the man in black robe hesitated for a while, but he was a little unsure about the identity of the person in front of him, so he had no choice but to answer. Because when he was merging with the heavenly Deo body at that time, because of the power of the late-stage Great Deo, he destroyed this body with all his strength. Upon hearing this, Qin Xian's eyes lit up and he smiled in his heart. Where is the master of your soul palace? I want to see him. By doing this, the second palace can be said to have directly controlled the strongest forces in the 10 regions. This approach is commendable. As the saying goes, the most dangerous place is the safest place. Standing above the main hall was a man wearing a black robe, a ghost mask on his face, and a cold breath. The man in black robe is from the Soul Palace. At this time, a group of top experts in Tianqian Palace were talking to each other, and the leader of them was Lin Tian. At this time, Qin Xian has arrived at the most terrifying place in the Profound Heaven Sect, which is the Tianqian Palace. Qin Xian raised his eyes to look at the man in black robe and asked without changing his expression. Anyway, Demon Race has been coveting his Profound Heaven Sect for a long time. Since there will be a direct fight sooner or later, why not directly confront him in his area? It was as if these two major forces did not exist at all, leaving only a mountain peak for emergencies. I spent the whole time in tears and regret. That's right, the current leader of Profound Heaven Sect is Lin Tian. Then Qin Xian didn't say anything more and disappeared from here. Oh. Qin Xian raised his eyebrows, held his chin and thought for a while before he understood the soul demon's intention. This made him a little confused, but he still answered patiently. The master of the palace is not in the section. He is currently leading the powerful people of the Soul Palace to develop in the netherworld. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of Fantasy, Obtain the Sect System. Author, Red General. Chapter 436. It was precisely because of this that he felt regretful. I regret why I did that at that time. Otherwise none of that would have happened at all. But talking too much brought tears to my eyes. At this moment, Lin Tian was having a deep conversation with a man in black robe. As for the others, they stood aside and listened respectfully. The conversation lasted for half a quarter of an hour. At the end of the conversation, Lin Tian waved the others to retreat. Only the man in black robe was left alone. After the others left, Lin Tian took a deep breath, waved his hand slightly, and a jade table appeared out of thin air in the hall. Then I saw Lin Tian sitting cross-legged on the ground without any regard for his majesty as the sect leader. Bloodthirsty Peak Master, please. Lin Tian made a gesture of invitation. Seeing this scene, Bloodthirsty laughed, nodded, and like Lin Tian, sat on the ground without caring about his identity. In the past 7 years, he and Lin Tianyi had a lot of fun talking, and gradually they became brothers. They often stay in the hall and taste wine with each other. Then they saw the two of them picking up the fairy wine on the jade table and drinking it down in one gulp. After the fairy wine entered his body, Lin Tian seemed to feel that all his worries disappeared. This feeling made him extremely comfortable. It's so cool. It's best when you're clean. Lin Tian was half lying on the ground and made a comfortable sound. Seeing this, Bloodthirsty shook his head and smiled helplessly. To be honest, this kind of fairy wine can't confuse his mind at all. After all, he has reached the immortal emperor at this moment. Unless you close your own cultivation. The reason why Lin Tian showed such an expression was because of this, but there were also other reasons. That is, every time Lin Tian finishes drinking, he will think of the past, of course, including the incident 7 years ago. And Bloodthirsty also kept comforting Lin Tian. Tell him to let go. but there were some things that Lin Tian simply couldn't let go of or forget. Brother Lin, the sect leader will definitely come back, and you don't have to immerse yourself in this state of self-blame all day long. You must know that you are the current master of Profound Heaven section. You are no longer the carefree master of Heavenly Sword Peak before. You always have to think about the bigger picture. Hearing this, Lin Tian was speechless, but picked up the fairy wine again and drank it. After a while, his cheeks turned slightly red, and he said drunkenly, "Brother Bloodthirsty, you don't need to speak to comfort me. I always believe that Master Bulletin is not dead, but this is just deceiving myself. 7 years have passed now, and Master still hasn't come back. Although I really hope to come back for a visit, all this is just a wish after all." Having said this, Lin Tian smiled bitterly, his eyes dimmed, and then he picked up the wine bottle again and drank it without hesitation. Hearing Lin Tian's words, Shuexiang gave him a deep look, but in the end he didn't say anything more. And Qin Xian was watching all this in the dark. "It seems that my second disciple has been immersed in regret and self-blame all these years. It's considered that you are interested." A smile appeared on Qin Xian's face, no longer hiding it, and his figure appeared behind Lin Tian. And Shuexian, who was thinking about it, happened to see Qin Xian. His pupils trembled and his expression was full of surprise. When he was about to speak, Qin Xian made a shh gesture to him. Feeling the touch on his left shoulder, Lin Tian didn't feel anything strange, and thought it was Bloodthirsty joking with him. He no longer had the drunken state before, but felt extra energetic. Qin Xian smiled slightly and gently patted Lin Tian's left shoulder with his hand. Master, is it really you? Are you really back?" The bloodthirsty man on the side smiled helplessly when he saw this, but he also understood that this kind of occasion was no longer suitable for him and it was time to leave. Then he bowed his hands respectfully to Qin Xian and left the hall. Except for some forces that dare not mess with it, both the human temple and the demon palace have a serious interest in this force. Moreover, he was now in a drunken state, his eyes were a little hazy, and his spirit was a little trance-like. It is precisely because of this that demon race started an extremely brutal fight with Profound Heaven sect. "Disciple, I haven't seen you for 7 years. You have grown a lot." At this moment, he couldn't bear it any longer, with tears in his eyes, he shouted softly. 7 years ago. Due to the lack of high-end combat power, Profound Heaven sect lost in the end, and lost miserably. The force behind him was Demon Race, and the Demon Lord was very interested in this force after seeing that shocking scene. At this time, Lin Tian did not pay attention to the bloodthirsty expression, nor did he notice that his master was behind him. He saw the figure that lingered in his mind, the person he respected the most in his life. At first he thought it was just a fantasy. Countless elders were killed and injured. In addition, one of the peak masters of one of the 16 peaks of the Profound Heaven sect also died. Qin Xian smiled at him, wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes with his hand, patted his shoulder, nodded and said. Hearing the very familiar voice in his ear that he had been thinking about day and night, Lin Tian came back to his senses instantly. At that time, the Profound Heaven sect had already exposed its position under the influence of the giant object. So he asked Shui Wuxia, who was staying nearby, to go and investigate. Hearing this, Lin Tian's nose felt sore and he wanted to cry loudly, but he held it back in the end. With some incredible thoughts, Lin Tian used his strength to carefully examine Qin Xian in front of him and found that he was actually real. "I'm a teacher. You don't have to blame yourself anymore. It's not necessary and you shouldn't. Besides, you are not wrong in all this. I am a teacher willingly for you. How can I say that I am wrong? Even if I really die well, how can I blame you?" Lin Tian's tone was a little trembling and choked, but he was more happy about Qin Xian's appearance. Seeing this situation, Bloodthirsty nodded and understood the meaning, and suppressed what he wanted to say. However, Qin Fen was present in the human temple, so he was only slightly interested in Profound Heaven sect and did not come to visit. After all, the occasion was wrong, and he was afraid of making a fool of himself in front of his brothers. Seeing this, Qin Xian was a little amused, but he had no intention of teasing him. Instead, he said softly. In the end, the master and the apprentice began to talk to each other like father and son. While talking, Qin Xian also learned about what happened 7 years ago. Seeing this scene, Lin Tian's eyes trembled, he clenched his fists and slowly turned his head. I also want to know what secrets this force has. Then Lin Tian saw Bloodthirsty pointing his finger behind him and showing him an incomprehensible smile. But the Demon Palace is different. Rebirth of Fantasy, obtain the Sect system. Author, Red General. Chapter 437. At that time, Lin Tian could not see any hope, because the Profound Heaven sect did not have an ancestor strong enough to fight against such a powerful enemy. Even the Soul Palace and the Shadow Palace are helpless. But at this critical moment, several powerful immortal emperors from Dragon race arrived here, and directly used the scroll given to them by Zilong to block several attacks from Shui Wuxia, and finally seriously injured him. And just like that, the strong men of Demon race were defeated. It is precisely because of this that Profound Heaven sect survived. The reason why Profound Heaven sect now has 12 powerful immortal emperors is that there are 3 immortal emperors from Dragon race sitting among them. Today, Profound Heaven sect has formed an alliance with Dragon race and is on the same boat. Of course, this is also what puzzles the world. Why would Dragon race, one of the powerful races that hides behind the scenes, form an alliance with a force that is about to lose? But even though they racked their brains, they couldn't figure out the relationship, but Qin Xian guessed something. Master, why do you think Dragon race entered into an alliance with me, Profound Heaven sect? Is it because Long Ao is from our sect? Lin Tianwen looked at Qin Xian, his eyes revealing doubts. Hearing this, Qin Xian didn't speak. After a long time, he replied. Maybe it's because they know I'm still alive. Of course, maybe it's because your God Dao body is helpful to them. Hearing this, Lin Tian lowered his head and looked at his hands. He never felt that it was his Dao body that attracted Dragon race. But now that his master has told all this, he can't ask in detail anymore. After all, it's meaningless. By the way, Master, if you come back this time, then my position as the sect leader should be returned to you. No. Qin Xian shook his head, patted Lin Tian on the shoulder and said. The news of my return this time has to be concealed. I am not going to tell the whole sect because I have to do some things as a teacher. Let's talk about it after it's done. So you continue to sit in the position of the leader of the Profound Heaven section. Hearing this, Lin Tian didn't say much and nodded. He knew his masters. Although Qin Xian said this, there were still a few people who Qin Xian was ready to tell them about his return. After half a stick of incense, several figures appeared in Tianqian Hall. These people are the bloodthirsty master of Black Devil Peak, the chief minister of the Enshrinement Hall, De Guyan, and the second minister of Pokianjun. Plus the great elder Lengwu. It's just that their expressions were a little strange at this moment, and their expressions revealed surprise, and disbelief, but most of them were happy. Bloodthirsty stood aside and didn't think anything of it. After all, he had just met Qin Xian. But the others are different. 7 years have passed, and Ling's original black and white beard and hair have all turned into white hair. His eyes were a little cloudy, revealing a hint of exhaustion. This shows how much he has paid for the sect in these 7 years. But when he saw Qin Xian's figure, a light suddenly appeared in his eyes. The eyes that were originally full of fatigue gradually showed happiness, but then they were happy, and several people hurriedly leaned over and said respectfully, "See the sect master and welcome the sect master back to the sect." Seeing this, Qin Xian nodded, patted their shoulders, looked at the tearful Ling Wu, and said softly. It's been hard on you these past years. It's not bitter, Ling Wu shook his head, compared with what the sect master did back then, how can I be considered bitter? Qin Xian shook his head and sighed. After all, he kept some words in his heart and did not say them out. Besides, now is not the time to reminisce about the past. Then Qin Xian looked at Zhuge Yan and Po Jun, who were standing respectfully, and nodded secretly. These two can be considered loyal. Even when the sect was in decline, they did not flee alone, but lived and died together with the sect. Especially Po Jun. Qin Xian learned about what he had done for the sect from Lin Tian's mouth. In that life and death battle, Po Jun directly carried 3 strong demon race immortal emperors and seriously injured them. It was precisely because of Po Jun's actions that Profound Heaven sect lost a few elders and disciples. Although Zhuge Yan was not as powerful as Po Jun, he at least tried his best. In that battle, he and his clone blocked 2 immortal emperors. After a long silence, Qin Xian began to discuss some matters with the people present. The discussion was nothing more than the future development of the sect. Qin Xian thought about it, and although there is no shortage of high-end powerful people in the sect now, they are not as good as the Demon Palace. Because both the Demon Palace and the Human Temple have powerful ancestors sitting in their seats, but he, Profound Heaven sect, does not. Therefore, fighting against these forces is tantamount to seeking death. The discussion lasted only a short time, only about half a stick of incense. Afterwards, Qin Xian solemnly said to several people, I have nothing else to say to you. We are going to fight against these forces now. Even if you can carry the disciples below, you can't. Just leave some more difficult matters to the second palace. After hearing Qin Xian's coherent words, several people nodded. Seeing this, Qin Xian looked at Zhuge Yan and Po Jun and said, Okay. I've said what I need to say. Just do it. Then you two will go to a place with me. After hearing this, the 2 men nodded respectfully, yes. Immediately, the 3 figures disappeared from Tianqian Palace. When Lin Tian and others who stayed in Tianqian Hall saw this, they looked at each other and left without saying anything more. Somewhere in the void, the figures of Qin Xian and the others appeared here. Qin Xian looked around, closed his eyes, and placed his palms in the air. The next moment, the void shook, and a crack tore open out of thin air. Seeing this scene, Qin Xian's expression remained unchanged. He looked at the 2 people behind him and said, Let's go. The 2 nodded and followed Qin Xian as he walked in. As the 3 people entered, the crack began to shake violently, and then the crack opened in a mysterious place. And this crack also alarmed the owner of this place. In a dark cave, an old man in black robe opened his eyes. The moment he opened his eyes, a huge aura surged out. A crutch covered with dragon-marked beads appeared out of thin air in the old man's hand. He raised his eyes and looked somewhere, and then the figure disappeared here. At this time, Qin Xian and the others walked out of the crack, and what they saw was a place full of huge mountains. And every giant mountain exudes a powerful aura, as if something terrifying is stationed here. Here it is. Po Jun looked at the unfamiliar place around him with a blank expression. Zhuge Yan on the side did not speak, only his eyes were seen solemnly looking at the mountain peak not far away. He sensed a dangerous aura in that mountain peak. Rebirth of Fantasy, Obtain the Sect System. Author, Red General. Chapter 438. Qin Xian glanced at the 2 of them, but did not speak, but stood in the air with a calm expression. It seems that he is waiting for someone to arrive. A few breaths later, a mysterious old man wearing a black robe and holding a cane appeared not far from Qin Xian. It happened that their eyes met each other at that moment. In an instant, a huge coercion descended here out of thin air, and the power of the great Dao spread throughout this area. The void also began to tremble due to the terrifying pressure of the two. The mountain peaks not far away were also trembling and swaying under the pressure of this breath, as if they would collapse in the next moment. When Gagayan and Pokyanjun felt this aura, their eyes froze and they didn't dare to move. Because they felt a fatal sense of threat in the old man in front of them. This kind of threat they had only felt in the original Shwewuxia. In the blink of an eye, this pressure disappeared again. A smile appeared on Qin Xian's face. He looked at the old man in front of him and said, "Profound Heaven Sect, Qin Xian is polite." Seeing this scene, the old man nodded slightly and responded with fists, but there was still a trace of surprise in his eyes. However, he still suppressed his desire to ask, glanced around, and said, "This is not the place to talk. Come with me." The old man turned around, and the hand holding the cane suddenly shook into the void. With a bang, a light ball wrapped around the figures of several people and disappeared. The next moment, he appeared in a dark cave. The old man also restrained his aura at this time and turned into an ordinary old man. However, Guguyan and Pokyanjun did not let down their guard because of this, but their expressions became more solemn. Seeing this, Qin Xian waved his hands to the two of them, saying it was okay. Then with a wave of his hand, a jade table appeared out of thin air between the two of them, and Qin Xian sat aside unceremoniously. Seeing this scene, the old man narrowed his eyes and stood opposite Qin Xian. He raised his eyes to look at him and said with a smile, "It seems that the old guy is right, you are not dead." "Old man?" Qin Xian raised his eyebrows when he heard this. He didn't know who the old guy was in the old man's mouth. But he can guess who this person is. After all, if Ancestral Dragon can call him an old guy, then his identity must be extraordinary. Maybe he is another strong ancestor of dragon race. "Don't you want him to come over and chat about family affairs?" Qin Xian said with a smile. Hearing this, Zilong shook his head and replied, "He doesn't have that much time. Even if I want to see him, it will take some time." He. Qin Xian chuckled. "So, you're not the one with the highest status in dragon race?" Zilong glanced at him and said, "It's me," but he shook his head and explained, "He and I are equal. He and I are in charge of different things. What I am in charge of is just some chores, and he is in charge of us, the future of dragon race. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't have known that there was such a monster like you in the 10 realms. I witnessed that battle that day with my own eyes. You are the only one who can make such a being take action. And besides that, I'm even more surprised that you are related to Tiandeo." Upon hearing this, Qin Xian raised his eyes and looked at Zilong. He shook his head and said modestly, "Being related to Tiandeo doesn't mean that I can quickly gain strength. I just have a cooperative relationship with him. But I have to thank you for your help back then, otherwise my Profound Heaven Sect would have been destroyed long ago." Zilong laughed and waved his hand, "It's just a small matter. After all, we have already had a cooperative relationship before, right?" Qin Xian shook his head, "This is different. You saved the lives of everyone in my section. So I owe you a huge favor." Having said this, Qin Xian smiled at Zilong again, "Of course, I can't return this favor now. I believe you have also sensed that my strength has declined, right?" Hearing this, Zilong raised his eyebrows. Qin Xian didn't tell him, he didn't know yet because he didn't check Qin Xian's strength carefully. It was just that his momentum collided with him a little, but he still nodded and replied, "I sensed it. Could it be caused by the collision with that thing back then?" Qin Xian nodded, "Yes, but I also got a treasure as a blessing in disguise. Do you want to know what this treasure is?" Zilong glanced at him and shook his head, "I don't want to know. After all, even if I want to know, will you tell me?" Upon hearing this, Qin Xian smiled helplessly and said, "This treasure is the body refining system promulgated by heaven. And heaven has given me this body refining system. What? Xiaolong's face was startled, as if he had heard some terrible news, and he looked at Qin Xian in disbelief. As the master of dragon race, he also knows some things about heaven, including the body refining system. The reason why the top 10 domain lords are so strong is also related to the body refining system. Xiaolong took a deep breath, feeling a little confused as to why Qin Xian told him this. And Qin Xian answered him just at this time. Don't worry, there is no other conspiracy behind telling you this. I just want you to help me. Help. After hearing this, Zilong did not answer immediately, but fell into deep thought. He knew what help Qin Xian needed. But he can't make the final decision on this matter. After all, who knows what Qin Xian wants their dragon race to do? If they were to have a confrontation with big forces like dragon race and demon race, it would be absolutely unfeasible. Du Guyan and Po Qinjun, who were behind Qin Xian, looked at each other in disbelief, but they just looked and did not speak. Qin Xian is also very patient and has been waiting for Zilong's answer. After all, he needs dragon race's help very much now. Finally Zilong sighed, looked at Qin Xian and shook his head and said, I'm sorry, although I don't know how you want dragon race to help me, but I also know that this matter is not simple, so I can't agree directly. At least it will take me some time to discuss it with the dragon race executives. After all, I am the leader of dragon race. What concerns me is the future of the entire race. I hope you can understand. Of course, if it's just some small help, I can satisfy you, but if you want me to go out, this is absolutely impossible. Xiaolong seemed to feel something was wrong again and added a few more words. Qin Xian was not surprised at all when he heard Xiaolong's words. With a movement of his hand, a golden light instantly flew into Zilong's mind, and in an instant, a complex Dao pattern appeared in front of him. This is Qin Xian giving the outline of another body refining system to Zilong. But just this rough idea surprised Zilong. He finally understood the difference between the ancestor and Dao ancestor. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Rebirth of Fantasy, Obtain the Sect System. Author, Red General. Chapter 439. This moment lasted for nearly a few sticks of incense. After a few sticks of incense, the complicated Dao pattern slowly dissipated. Qin Xian, who was on the side, looked at Zilong's appearance, chuckled and asked, How is it? Xiaolong glanced at him, shook his head and exclaimed, It's not on the same level at all. I see unprecedented power in Dao ancestor. Then do you want to get this body refining system? After all, this allows you to see more powerful power. Qin Xian looked at Zilong with raised eyebrows, his tone a hint of bewilderment. But who is Zilong? A person who has lived for an unknown number of years has been deceived tens of thousands of times. I also know what to ask for and what not to ask for. Zilong shook his head and said, I need time to think about it. Seeing this, Qin Xian glanced at him and said no more. Knowing that it was almost done, he stood up, nodded and said, Okay, 10 years later, I will wait for your answer. Then he left here with the two people behind him. After a few people left, Xiaolong also stood up. With a bang, a crack appeared out of thin air in front of him. Seeing this scene, Xiaolong stepped in. Then Xiaolong came to another place, which is also the most mysterious place of dragon race. Looking at the entire dragon race, only a few powerful immortal emperors know about it. I saw Xiaolong walking forward, and soon he came to a magnificent palace. There are two huge dragon-shaped statues outside the palace. The statue is lifelike and stands here like a real dragon. The true dragon aura here is also extremely strong, enough to allow some dragons with low bloodline to reach the top bloodline of dragon race. Xiaolong did not stop and continued walking forward, passing through several palaces and finally came to an altar covered with Taoist patterns. There are several laws scattered here, and they will change every time you look at the great Dao, making it difficult to guess the truth. In the middle of the altar, there was an old man wearing a white robe sitting cross-legged. The old man closed his eyes tightly and moved his fingers from time to time. He seemed to be thinking about something. Zalong came to the old man in white robe, glanced at him, and said to him, "Dream machine, your prophecy came true. He came to Dragon Race and just had a few words with me." The old man in white robe named Menji opened his eyes after hearing this, but soon closed them again. He probably knew everything about the matter. After all, he is the other strong ancestor of the dragon race, and he is also the only dragon who can predict the future and see through the secrets of heaven. He heard the conversation he had with Qin Xian just now. He exhaled slightly and said softly, "I already know everything about the matter, what do you think?" Hearing this, Xiaolong glanced at him, sighed helplessly, and said, "Do you think I, dragon race, should help him?" Menji smiled, opened his eyes, looked at him and asked, "Do you want to help him?" This, Zalong frowned, not knowing how to answer. After thinking for a moment, he said, "I think about it but don't want to, because the forces he wants to fight are the Demon Palace and the Human Temple, and even those guys. But I, Dragon Race, don't have the strength to help him at all. Even if I can help him, will he definitely succeed? What if he fails? Then my Dragon Race will suffer countless disasters. I don't dare to gamble." Po Qinjun hesitated for a moment, and asked bravely, "Sect Master, I wonder what we are doing in the Kunlun region. But this is our only chance, isn't it?" Looking at the strange scene nearby, the two people behind him were puzzled for a while. They didn't understand why Qin Xian brought them here. The catastrophe of Dragon Race is coming. Are you sure we can stop it with the power of you and me? Temple of Heaven? Do you want to take this opportunity to take action against the forces here? Seeing this, Menji pointed at the phantom and said, "Look, in addition to these, he has even been favored by heaven, and heaven has given him the body refining system he created. On the other side, Kunlun domain. He. And he can directly fight against this kind of thing. Although he lost, he also won." The scene inside is exactly the scene of Qin Xian's confrontation with the giant thing. When he becomes invincible, I, Dragon Race, will become his most powerful force. We can even take this opportunity to see another dimension. After hearing Menji's coherent words, Zalong fell into silence and did not refute his words. Xiaolong lowered his eyes and stooped slightly. At this moment, he seemed to have become an old man who was about to die. Don't forget, his strength has not yet reached that level. If he really reaches that level, then he will be an invincible existence in the world. Upon hearing this, the two of them looked startled and looked at each other, as if they knew something and stopped asking questions. Hearing this, Qin Xian shook his head, looking at a palace that flickered in the distance, and said. At this point, the picture inside rotated, and a shadow with no visible face stood in front of Qin Xian. Hearing this, Menji glanced at him, shook his head, stretched his eyebrows, and said leisurely. "Are you sure he won't die on the way? I don't dare to gamble on the future of Dragon Race. After all, you can only roughly determine what will happen to this person, but you don't know what will happen to him in the future. Menji, I understand what you are saying, but are you really sure that his future journey will be smooth?" Because there were several powerful immortal emperors in the Tiandao Palace, Qin Xian did not rush in. After all, he only came here to discuss some things and did not want to become an enemy of this force. "This time I am going to the Tiandao Palace." The figures of Qin Xian and the others appeared here. But it's only in mid-air. Menji pointed at Qin Xian inside and whispered, "Look, his strength is only immortal emperor, but because he has a special field, he has been promoted to ancestor. I believe you also understand the power of this body refining system, and I am also sure that he will be able to reach that level in a short time. Finally, he glanced at the dream machine. Let me think about it. Menji chuckled and waved his hand, and the scene 7 years ago appeared in front of them. We have no way out. We can only choose to help him. If we don't help, we can only wait for the disaster to come. In the blink of an eye, Qin Xian led the two of them outside the Tiandao palace. After a moment of silence, Xiaolong looked at Menji and spoke what was in his heart. What if he was strangled by that kind of existence just when he was about to succeed? Are you sure you won't regret it then? Rebirth of Fantasy, obtain the Sect system. Author, Red General. Chapter 440. The Tiandao Palace is a power hidden in the mountains. There are not many buildings in this power, and there is only one extremely splendid palace as far as the eye can see. Because the Tiandao Palace represented the will of Tiandao when it was first established, it did not build a palace like other forces. Instead, just build one. Although the Tiandao Palace is now in decline, it is still protected by an ancient magic circle. Even the two powerful ancestors can't even think of breaking through. At this moment, in the Temple of Heaven, an old man wearing a star robe and sitting cross-legged in the hall suddenly opened his eyes and looked into the distance. There was a hint of hidden complexity and confusion in his eyes. After thinking for a moment, he decided to go out and take a look. After all, others were coming, and it would be rude for him not to make some gesture. The next moment, the old man turned into a stream of light and rushed out of the Tiandao Palace, appearing above the clouds. And he happened to see the figures of Qin Xian and the others. Seeing the figures of Du Guyan and Po Tianjun, his expression did not change much. After all, they were just two immortal emperors. But when he saw Qin Xian's figure, his expression suddenly froze, but he still hid it well. But secretly, he carefully checked Qin Xian's strength, and as expected, it had declined. After all, suffering such a serious injury and losing strength was not bad, and he had to admire Qin Xian. Qin Xian, who was opposite him, didn't know what the old man was thinking about, but he said with a smile on his face, "Your Excellency should be the master of this Tiandao Palace, Xin Chen, right?" Hearing this, Xin Chen looked up at Qin Xian and nodded. "It's me." Although Qin Xian's strength has declined, he will not say some arrogant and domineering words. After all, he couldn't figure out this person. Besides, the scene 7 years ago still lingers in my mind. He still has some respect for Qin Xian. Because he is the first person in history who dares to directly confront the territory lord. I wonder why Qin fellow Daoist came to my Tiandao palace, Xin Chen asked aloud. Qin Xian smiled and said softly, "It's nothing serious, I just want to discuss something with the lord of the palace." "Oh." Xin Chen raised his eyebrows and asked hesitantly, "I wonder if fellow Daoist Qin has anything to discuss with me." Qin Xian glanced at him and said lightly, "The way of heaven." Hearing the word Tiandao, Xingchen's expression suddenly changed and became solemn. He glanced around and turned around. "This is not the place to talk. You three come with me." Then Xin Chen led the three people to a place full of forbidden secrets in the Tiandao Palace. No one can hear anything that is said here. Not Qin. What does the way of heaven that fellow Daoist just said mean? Xin Chen looked at Qin Xian seriously and asked. After all, this news is too important to him in Tiandao Palace. But Qin Xian did not reply. Instead, he looked at him and said with a smile, "I want to know if the master of Star Hall wants to return to heaven." Xin Chen looked stunned, looked at Qin Xian and nodded, "Of course I think about it all the time." Hearing this, Qin Xian showed a smile. "That's right, I want the Temple of Heaven to surrender at the feet of my profound heaven sect, and all must obey my orders from now on." Hearing this, Sien Chen frowned and looked a little unhappy, but he still tried his best to calm down and replied softly. Qin fellow deist, although I know that your talents are extremely beautiful and monstrous, it is absolutely impossible to make me, Tiandeo Palace, surrender based on these. The only people I want to surrender to in Tiandeo Palace are Tiandeo, and no one else has this qualification. In this regard, Qin Xian still kept a smile on his face, and was not surprised at all by Xingqian's rejection, and continued. Then what if I say that I am the way of heaven? Are you a Tiandeo? Xing Chen glanced at Qin Xian suspiciously, with an expression of disbelief. Although he saw the shadow of Tiandeo in front of Qin Xian that day, it did not mean that Qin Xian was Tiandeo. Seeing this scene, Qin Xian no longer concealed anything and moved his palm. A majestic shadow instantly rushed into Xingqian's mind, and an extremely powerful pressure made Xing Chen kneel down. His face showed boundless respect. As a loyal follower of Heavenly Deo, Tiandeodian will definitely kneel down whenever he encounters something of Heavenly Deo, otherwise it would be disrespectful. The next moment, a fantastic great Deo Sanskrit sound appeared in front of Xingqian's eyes. At this moment, his eyes were wide open. It seemed that he had seen something incredible. This, is this? Xing Chen exclaimed. The great Deo Sanskrit sounds in front of him began to change into words one after another, and something mysterious and mysterious wandered in front of him. This is the cultivation law of the initial heavenly way. His Tiandeo Palace also has this body refining system, but it is very incomplete and can only be practiced to about immortal sovereign. But cultivating to immortal sovereign has no effect at all. So this kind of thing was put into Sutra Pavilion. Unexpectedly, he would see the real body refining system here today. Xing Chen took a deep breath and tried his best to suppress his excitement. Then he looked at Qin Xian hesitantly and said, I still have to think about this matter. Can I give you an answer soon? Hearing this, Qin Xian nodded, knowing that the matter was done, it was just a matter of time. Then I won't stay much longer and take my leave. After saying that, Qin Xian disappeared here with the two figures. Seeing the people leaving, Xing Chen lowered his eyes, his expression changed, and he fell into thinking. A few hours later, on a mountain peak in the netherworld, Qin Xian did not return to the sect, but took the two of them to the netherworld, where he had to deal with some things. Feeling the raging demonic energy here blowing across his face, Qin Xian's expression did not change at all. At this moment, he was dressed in black, with black hair flying. A pair of dark eyes were as dark as a fountain under the moon, and it seemed that nothing in the world could move him in any way. When Du Guyan and Po Jun behind Qin Xian saw this, they looked at each other. Although they had some answers to what Qin Xian had just done, they still had some confusion in their hearts. Du Guyan leaned over and cupped his hands, asking Qin Xian. Sect Master, I have a few things that I don't understand. Upon hearing this, Qin Xian glanced sideways at him, say. Seeing this, Du Guyan nodded and said. Sect, although our profound heaven sect's power is not as strong as these forces, it is at least one of the first. Why do you, Sect Master, condescend to discuss this with them? From the perspective of my subordinates, the current strength of the Sect Master is only temporary. I believe that it will be restored to its heyday in the near future. At that time, these forces will have no effect on the Sect Master at all. My subordinates are a little confused about this. Could it be that Lord Deo Sect did this simply to capture them?